Hey folks, this is Fabrice, and we're hopping into a Scarlet run. And this is a run not on the most recent patch, but the patch, not the hot fix, right, that came out this morning, but the new patch that had all the balance changes and the eco changes, which have since been reverted. So yeah, it's been an interesting 48 hours in the Ravens Watch community. They made a number of changes to the eco, to I mean, the eco's kind of overshadowed everything, but balance changes to characters. And there's actually a lot of little quality of life things that we kind of neglected to talk about as a community because there were some other things that we were more, I guess, tense about. So I wanted to talk about some of those just really quickly. I really love the changes to, I'd say, health bars. The big health bars for big enemies feels really satisfying right now, fighting mini bosses, for example. It always felt bad when you'd hit a mini boss and the health bar just wouldn't move. And so it being a larger health bar is just, I think, viscerally more satisfying. And the changes to the straw house, well, not the straw house, just with the whole chapter 1 quest, so the Three Pigs quest. I played that one. I've had a chance now to play it on all 3 of them. I'd say that I like it better. It still feels to me like the straw quest is probably a little bit harder than the others, but it's not as much harder. I feel like the spawns getting reined in made a big difference for that. So overall, I'd say that that's a big win for that, for the chapter 2 side quest. I think you'll be able to take it earlier on average than before. Teleporter speed updates. So they went from, I believe, 6 to 4 seconds. Really love that. Before it, you just sat twiddling your thumbs whenever you did a teleporter, and it's nice not to have so long to sit and contemplate life when you're teleporting around. And there's a lot of VFX changes. There's a note in the patch notes that says, and I quote, added some particle effects to guide players to unreveal teleporters and health fountains. And it's subtle enough that I didn't pick up on that in the first run through. I noticed there were more particles, but I didn't realize why there were more particles. So that's actually, come to think of it, Risk of Rain 2 does that. This, by the way, in the background, I beat the camp, but there was this one cultist just outside watching me. And so she aggroed, and now we have like to fight everything all over again. And then there's another heal and then there's another. I honestly, emotionally, I was not doing great at this stage of the run when all those things aggroed in. I'm a little bit, my psyche can be a little bit delicate, so it was just kind of funny. But also, I got double strike on a really early row, so this is going to end up going in more of a dash strike direction. And it's interesting that I got to I'll build with that much dash strike synergy without really being able to use rerolls the way I normally would. I use a reroll here, by the way, for a common item. I don't think that that's advised. Also, green armor is going to be much better once you have a bunch of items. It's interesting because if you pick up a green armor in chapter 3, early in chapter 3, it's a huge boost. But if you get it this early, it's not really going to speed your run up that much. It's not that much armor. So I think it's a good item. That's why I took it. And I blew a reroll to get it. I just don't think it's super worth it at this stage. I probably would have, unless I managed to stack them. And playing for stacks on items right now, or at least in this patch, is not very good. There's just, and I think that actually opens a question of like, what do we really want from super effects moving forward? Because that was one of the things that they wanted to reel in, and it kind of felt like super effects just suddenly became too much of a liability to play for in the game in general. So I don't know. We'll talk about super effects again later, but going back to the changes. So they didn't just change the in-game economy. They also They changed Grimoires, so on average, you get less value, not just from rerolls, but also from crit-related modifiers. So the option that increases your average crit chance and the boost to your crit damage. So there was that. There were the changes to Shadow Strike. So Shadow Strikes honestly has always been an outlier for Scarlet. And so there's a warranted change, but I was, she's my girl, and I wanted to still see that she was in a good place. And I know that there are a lot of people who love her alternative talents, but I just feel like the consistency of Shadow Strikes was just so much better than all the others. And I guess I just really was worried that if every start suddenly felt like a shapeshifter start, then I wouldn't have loved that. So I really wanted to see if I could force a crit build on Scarlet still, and it would feel good. And it does. And when we start to get a little bit more developed, I want to talk about some of the other things that kind of quietly make crit more intuitive to go for in general. I think that it's funny because I think that we almost... I feel like my crit builds are honestly better on Scarlet now than they were before, because they're not competing with rerolls the same. But something to realize about realize about this run is that we have Double Strike, and Double Strike has a sterling reputation in the community. Deservedly, it's a lot of damage, but it also means that you're using your escape for damage. Getting that talent upgrade right there, level upgrade, really clutch. Because you're using your escape to do damage, on average, with a dash strike build, if you're playing around it, you're going to take more damage. And unless you're really optimizing it well. But I think that in the average carer's place, and I consider myself very much the average player, it has a trade-off, right? And I think that a lot of the time we just like see the numbers and we're just, it's like, oh, it's a good talent, everyone takes it. We don't necessarily think about the trade-off here that, you're consistently throwing your dash out, and that means that you get hit by more things. Definitely in the fight, just outside of the mine, you saw that. I took a lot more damage than I would have if I was playing like an explosive rush power synergy style. Explosive rush, by the way, got massively updated. I've played with it in 1 or 2 runs. I don't have... I always felt like Explosive Rush and Fan of Spikes kind of are tricky to both have in the same build. And Fan of Spikes being kind of a dash strike synergistic talent, I feel like Explosive Rush is definitely not as dominant as it used to be. But it was so dominant to the point that when I was playing the game before, I wouldn't take it because it felt too strong. So on the one hand, again, Explosive Rush is a fun talent. It's cool. It also, one of the best things about it is it ties together your special synergies with your power synergies. So if you're building around a power build and then you get a bunch of talents, like, I don't know, Armor Break or, I don't know, Pulverize or something, all of a sudden, because of Explosive Rush, that ties together those talents. So you're getting the special effects on your power, essentially. And that's really strong, right? Explosive Rush, even with the nerfs, I think it's still fine. I know that there's some up and down reactions, and I maybe we need more time on this, but I think that it's a warranted change. I think that I was playing it less because it felt too good. So that's now this is an interesting fight, right? So first off, they changed the spawns, and it looks to me like there's less spawning. I should probably look at the notes, but it feels like there aren't quite as many enemies at once. Now the combination is pretty tough for wolf, right? Because we have trees and we have cultists. So the cultists kind of have the tracking ability that the trees lack. So the trees have these big AoEs, and wolf has a huge hitbox. That was so bad right there. I had to walk through the cultist. It wasn't a bad decision. It was just a bad situation. I had to walk through the cultist's attacks because there was a massive AoE. But yeah, so this is just a tricky situation to be in as wolf. You know, you have to dodge so much. You do handle the spiders better than Scarlet would, but if human form, then you wouldn't have to be facing those. But we get ahead of it, and it feels to me like there's less enemies, or maybe they spawn in a little bit more staggered. I know that there were a couple different changes made. House health was regulated. The number of elite enemies on some waves were changed. I don't want to get into that too deep. Okay, and here we go, 7 league boots. So now we have 7 league boots, we have phantom spikes, we have double strike. And we also, I didn't mention this, we got the legendary upgrade on double strikes, which was the perfect choice. If it had gone to on the hunt, that would have been a bummer, because you don't need, on the hunt, the top end of the duration is so ridiculously long that you will never need that. You just don't need it. I think that, oh man, I don't want to be proposing changes to Scarlet, but I think that you could probably decrease the low end of that talent, and it would be a more meaningful distinction. But I don't know that you need to do that. Don't feel like you have to do that. But I do think it's a decent point. Yeah, like right now, I just wouldn't, with the situation of the game in this game that I played being as it was, I just don't think going for money related items or items in general really makes sense. I think that you just stay away from that entirely. You probably, like, super effects were basically dead with this update, because you wouldn't have the rerolls to guarantee the thing that you wanted. So I think one of the things that we need to have a conversation about as a community and with the devs is, like, how many super effects do we want players to be able to get in a given run? And do we want them to have more control over which ones they get, right? Because it kind of feels like the super effects were deemed too strong. But, like, one of the implicit disadvantages to super effects right now is that there are items that you don't want to take because they're going to dilute your copy pool for items from the shop. And based on the dev stream today, they do want to make the shaping spells or boosts in the shop, they want to make those rare to get. And the way they're going to do that is by adding more options in the shop so that you don't get them as consistently. And I have mixed feelings, because I feel like once again, we don't want people to not get super effects. We want them to be able to experience that aspect of the game. But we need to have a conversation around what is a decent number to get in a game, right? Like, what are we aiming for? Because it kind of feels like they don't want you to have 3 or more, or I don't know, maybe like more than 1 on average. And I'm up and down with that. I don't know that super effects need, like, I think that they're interesting enough that we should make sure that we're allowing players to get them, right? I think that I think it also kind of leaves an itch in the player's brain if at the end of a run you were really close to getting a super effect and you just didn't get the right RNG for it, right? So we'll see. Okay, yeah, we're actually looking for a key at the moment, and we're going to have some trouble finding it. That was actually a topic that came up in the dev stream. The conversation was something to the effect of they're looking at ways to update it, make it, to improve it based on player feedback, but they're not certain about what direction they want to go with it. Also, I think I have bad luck overall with keys because, as you can see at this point, I've checked probably. So it's a mini boss that spawned kind of on the corner of the map, and I've already gotten rid of probably over 2/3. Honestly, almost all of the area where it could spawn, and I haven't found it yet. And I think one thing that's on my mind is that the area that it covers that the key could spawn in is the same for single player as it is for multiplayer. So if you're playing multiplayer, the current spawn radius doesn't seem like that big of an obstacle. But if you're playing solo player and you have to do all that yourself, I think that's where the problem is. So I'd say one idea is to make them around points of interest, right? So that you find the key at a camp. And I talked about that. Another option is just to make the radius different depending on the number of players, which I think is also quite good. I think there's probably a lot of ways that you could potentially change it up, make it feel overall better. We'll see what direction they go with. So here's one of the big changes. So now hits a chapter on anatomy. So now because of the updates to rerolls, the Stars of Fate, I should say, in the context of the game, and the changes to the in-game economy, which implicitly had a big impact on Leprechaun Coin. There's no longer a compelling reason to just pick Stars of Fate all the time from Grimoires. And so because of that, I'm picking crit all the time. And so although my crit builds before were doing really well with like more Star of Fate driven gameplay, because I know that rerolls aren't going to do me as much good, now I'm putting all that into crit. So that was 40% crit damage right there, and then I also had the green grimoire before. I think I'm going to go back through this video and I'm going to add a counter for all the times that I tack on more crit. And we'll see how crazy it gets. I know viscerally how crazy it gets. I haven't done the math yet, so you're going to have the edge on me because you're going to have the numbers for how much the crit's going to update. But yeah, it seems to do pretty darn well. And okay, see, we found the key, by the way. Last place it could have spawned. That's my experience a lot with keys, is I get them at the very last moment. We're also at level 5 already, and that was not the case very often for me prior to the update. But they did change the XP, so now Nightmare, formerly it was minus 40%, and they changed it to minus 30% XP, I believe. And this change to the XP makes a big difference for me, because it means that I end up having the ultimate available in this phase of the game, so I can use it to pick up like a mini boss. Also, I haven't played as much Scarlet Shotgun. Howl. What is that? What's technically, what is it called? It's the Roar, Gusting Roar. I haven't played that as much. I've mostly played the In the Belly, Grandmother's Souvenir style, which Grandmother's Souvenir, by the way, thematically, right, the effect is very good. I think that it's really well designed. It's very morbid, though. She's taking her grandma's ashes and she's throwing them at her enemies. And yeah, that's something that I didn't realize until I thought about it. So it's a little bit morbid. It's kind of fun to lean away from that. But I will say they made some changes to how stun happens. I thought that they were nerfs, but I feel maybe it's because I'm getting it earlier. But Scarlet's, the shotgun, to me feels much better for stunning big enemies. It seems like a kind of a duelist weapon, you know, for mini boss fights in a way that it wasn't, at least in my experience, prior to the update. We have a lot of damage at the moment. It's very nice. On the Hunt value, the double strike, 7 league boots. It's pretty good. And I missed my double strike there. Oh, double strike update, by the way. So, haven't really talked about this yet, but one of the... They say that for the changes, they watched a lot of videos. And I definitely think that they may have seen a couple of mine, because whenever I play double strike, the update says that now double strike has a... How do they call it? They said that double strike has an animation. It has a faster animation, I think, so that it's easier to or turn or rotation. The bottom line is it's easier to aim double strike quickly after a dash, and so a lot of the time I'll pop it out. And I will, prior to the update, I won't get my character oriented toward the target in time, like after the dash. So that update to the speed was a direct Febreze buff. Although the nerf to Shadow Strikes was a direct Febreze nerf, right? So it kind of balances itself out. By the way, look how optimistically I look into this shop. Like it's going to be useful to me. I did get Hungry Grass as a late pickup in Chapter 1, which is a huge deal for the run. It's going to pay off a lot of dividends. We're already at 8% more damage. And there was a Philosopher's Stone in that shop, which is thematically very solid in conjunction with Hungry Grass, right? It increases your survivability for picking... I've just bathed in that fire. It's a good... It's a good boost. It's a nice synergy. But I saw the Hope Diamond in the shop, and like a fool, I felt like, well, see Hope Diamond, take Hope Diamond. And I think that was a bad call. I think that in this iteration, I think you just stay away from anything eco related, especially because I'm going to be putting so much of my money into crit and into the Grimoire. So I don't think that there was a point to that. I think I should have just I shouldn't have worried about it, but I did worry about it. And I'm also doing something different here than I often do. I have this tendency of in the past, I've had this tendency that when I'm aggroing stuff into a fight, I don't worry about fighting it outside the camp. I just drag it all into the camp with me. And that can lead to a lot of frustrating situations with aggroing cultists, like healers into a fight, priests into a fight. Thankfully, I took the time outside the camp to eliminate those guys, and it's really helping this fight. And I also got turned into a wolf at a really good time. I think that the wolf does pretty good against these kinds of gens. Not as much the purple gen, but these kinds of gens. And I'm starting to get my health back. Oh, I get offered mermaid tears here. I don't end up taking it. I think I go for the Dreamcatcher because I have the Hope Diamond on my mind. No, I actually go for the power, which is solid. But we don't really talk about mermaid tears at the moment. I think that one reason is that if you go into a big crit build, you're getting a lot more damage. You're getting a percentage more of damage, and since you're already healing for a percentage, getting a lot of crit damage on Scarlet kind of feels like you're getting mermaid tier effects. So it's kind of a, you know, it's kind of like, why would you go for mermaid tiers? But I do want to say, I think mermaid tiers are one of those things that we haven't really talked about a ton that will probably blow up the meta in the future. And Gusting Roar. I have so many bad experiences with Gusting Roar where that, like, I've had so many bad experiences with Gusting Roar where I set it up and then everything aggroes onto me and I just die trying to get it off. And that's overall, I'd say, the tricky thing with a lot of ults in the game, to be honest. There's a lot of... You get locked down a lot when you pop your ults on most characters. And that can be tough. We picked up energy. We're going to talk about that. But ults, I'd say that I was actually really surprised when I did this. It's been a while since I played Gusting Roar and Hunter's Souvenir. And they felt really nice this run. They're helping me farm faster. I wasn't getting punished for using them. I was using them more cautiously. So I'd say that I actually really like the direction. And also it's cool that they have an upgrade for those ults now. There's just a level of interesting things that you can do with those that you didn't have before. So about energy. So energy got nerfed. So you get less crit per combo stack. I think, don't have the numbers right in front of me. Oh, hold on. Yeah, I do. So it now increases crit chance by 4 to 7% instead of 4 to 10%. So on the low end, it's pretty similar, but on the high end, it's a lot lower. And I don't know. Let's see. So if it's 7% maximum, if you have all of your combo stacks, which isn't going to happen a ton, that's going to be 35% extra crit. I mean, yeah, total extra crit. But you have to get all the combo stacks. And I'm playing with Phantom Spikes and Double Strike. So I don't know that that's really an optimal constellation of those talents. It is cool, though. It's fun because... It's interesting because it does mean that I do have really large one target hits. Getting trapped here was a bit of a bummer, but I had the iframes, so no worries. I don't know how I feel about that update, but I do feel like crit's still good after the change, so it might not be a problem. What do we see in this chest? Oh, okay. I went for the double power because I'm still thinking, oh, maybe I'll get a, I'll get enough for a super effect, which didn't happen. So, spoiler. I think though that was probably still the right choice. There's a Goldilocks porridge in there that I thought I took because I think I ended up taking one later, which is kind of a fun pickup. I don't think it was. I definitely wouldn't take a Goldilocks porridge over a King of Clubs on average. Anyway, still making pretty good time. I think we're starting to outscale the difficulty of the game. We're not quite there yet. I think that we have like 1 or 2 more pickups, but you can tell we're slicing things up and we're handling business very capably at the moment. Use a reroll for an item, and I didn't. Oh yeah, so this is an interesting one because the Raven Eye is obviously the higher value item, but I'm still thinking I might be able to get an epic on one of my other 2 epics I have. So I decide rather than diluting that pool, I'm going to get a common item, and it doesn't end up going anywhere because super effects are just not really viable on this patch. playing for them anyway. Or if you do play for them, you have to have a very specific plan. And I didn't have that, so just kind of like trying to play like normal and make it work, because it wasn't happening. I'm also getting close to having enough money for legendary from the shop. I think it's 540 dream shards. Oh yeah, get that globe, And now I have Goldilocks porridge. I think Goldilocks porridge makes sense to have a couple stacks of, but it doesn't really make sense to have like 5 stacks of it, right? You get one, you get strength, and strength is 25% damage. It's applied to you rather than to your target, so it's worse than an effect like vulnerable or marked, but it's not insignificant, right? It's quite a decent buff to have. I think Goldilocks porridge, though, it feels like something that you don't want. You don't want to stack a ton. And overall, I think that's a challenge in the game right now, that there's some effects that on common items that you don't really care about stacking a ton, but they have super effects, and there's also a trade-off that if you get some of these, like ones that you only conceivably want 1 or 2 stacks of, then the things that you do want super effects on, the items you do want super effects on, are kind of punishing that, right? Because then you're diluting that item pool, and you're making copying things in the shop less effective. I don't know. I don't want to eliminate super effects as a play style, and we get more credit here. I think that it's really nice to have it be part of the concept of a build that you want to get to super effects, but I don't want it to negatively affect your average. I don't want to feel like I see an item and I don't want to take it because it's diluting my pool. That feels not as good. I don't know. I think if you look at a game like Slay the Spire has the shop, and I think that there's some people that in the community that feel like the rerolls and shops give the player too much control over the RNG, but there's a lot of examples of roguelikes that have things like this, right? Like Slay the Spire has the shop, and in the shop you can get cards and relics, and you have a selection that you can pick from. Like, I think conceptually, it's not really that different. I don't think that we're going to kill the game by giving us some control over the RNG in that form. One thing I've been thinking about, though, is that in a lot of games like this, right, your Hades as an example, your talents they have a rarity associated with them that you get at the time that they're offered, and you don't have the chance to upgrade them. In Raven's Watch, you do have the chance to upgrade them in the shop. So that's one of the pressures on your gold income in the game, is that you want to have enough money to put that into talent levels, right? If we don't really want, if one of the effects of this change to the market is that upgrading talents had to be much more strategic and thoughtful. And I actually like that element of it, right? I like to be presented with this, like, okay, I know that an upgrade for Double Strike is really strong, whereas an upgrade for on the Hunt is not as impactful. I like that there's that element of game knowledge where you have to decide what you're going to prioritize. So what if you didn't have the opportunity to upgrade items in the shop anymore, and that meant that dream shards would be more for items than they are for talents? and you still had the stuff in the shop that would upgrade talents, right? So you could still get a legendary if you get the right object from the shop. You could still like upgrade 2 of your talents a level. That way you wouldn't have like 20 transactions at the shop that really make golden egg really strong. Because I think that's something we didn't really talk about. Like that was something that didn't get called out explicitly. But one of the things that was really strong about the previous patch is that you had all that money and golden egg just goes nuts. So I don't know, maybe if you did something like that, that way that the spells in the shop are really important to the run. And that feels to me very much like Slay the Spire-esque. I think that you'd have to up the average, rarity of a item of a talent when you find it. I think that those would need to be higher than they are right now to make that like interesting. I think that'd be one interesting way though to change the in-game economy if they're looking for changes. By the way, this Cyclops got an update, and look at that crit. That's nice off of the Hunter souvenir. I think I just take a evisceration here just because I haven't gotten to play with it a ton. But yeah, the Cyclops got updated so that it heals if it eats the player, and it gets strength if it eats the prisoners. And we didn't get to see that because we just killed the Cyclops too fast. But there are changes there as well that have been made. And at this point, I'd say that I'm pretty well rolling. And getting Swan Cloak is huge. It's so big because I have a dash build, right? Now, I'm taking so much damage. I almost die here anyway, just because I just ate that laser. Ran out of buttons. And that's kind of connected to dash synergies, right? I mean, not dash synergies specifically, but that's connected back to the challenge of managing your dashes as damage, because I'm using my cooldowns to reset my dash counter, to reset my dash counter all the time. This means that I would say that I'm much more vulnerable overall on this build than if I was running a traditional power build that just kind of keeps its difference and it goes in with explosive rush. This is a much riskier style of play. It's fun. It's cool. Oh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Oh, it's happening. Yep. My thought process when I played this is I wanted to pick up the items that I saw were, some of the talents I saw were getting changed, and also some of the items that were being nerfed by, like, there were no direct changes to Hope Diamond at this point, but I knew that that's their angle, is that they wanted to reel in Hope Diamond. And it was way too late for this pickup. I think that the better option would have been to put that into Philosopher's Stone. Probably try to prioritize Philosopher's Stone a little bit earlier. Try to dodge that egg there. Didn't really work. But I'm also about to discover that fountains were changed. The price of fountains were changed. That's something I don't think I realized until pretty close in here. Because, yeah, I feel like fountains really took a hit after this change up. One of the things that was nice in the new eco of the game after not these 2 patches, but like in the Avalon update, has been that wells became relevant again, because for a long time they weren't. I would still like to see wells in a place where they're situational, but okay, now this is very indicative of how strong the build has gotten at this point, right? I just tank everything from the right side of Jin, and it doesn't faze me because I've got enough health and I've got Swan Cloak. Really importantly, I have Swan Cloak and I have Lifesteal. So I'd say Swan Cloak for Scarlet in this stage of a game, because I have a decent sized health pool, is probably better than is probably a better pickup for you, is particularly with a dash synergistic build than Golden Coat of Chainmail. Golden Coat of Chainmail got nerfed pretty hard. Well, I don't know how hard it is yet. It's instead of it being 30% damage, it's 50% damage. So that'll stop you from being one shot, but it's not quite as strong as it was before. And you can really see it in this fight. I took a bunch of damage there. I'm healing it. I took a little bit of damage there. I go over here, Gusting Roar. The other thing is I just have a lot of damage, but a lot of this too is Swan Cloak. I'm about to take a bunch of damage here, I think. Yeah, I took some damage there. I ate a bunch of bubbles here. Oh, I actually hadn't taken that much damage, but after seeing how well I was taking stuff, I just sit here and I drink the bubbles from that crab. And as you can tell, I ate it pretty handily. I should have dashed right after it happened, so that was kind of a mistake. But then I come over here, I get 50 health back really quickly, and then I have to get out of dodge because now I am human form. Okay, so little crabs, right? Look at the little crabs. Look at them. This is the best part of the update, guys. This is like S tier right here that they added all those little crabs to this boss fight. I actually really enjoy the little crabs, in case it isn't obvious. But yeah, you see how much stagger we did with the Hunter's Souvenir. It's such a nice tool in these mini boss duels. And I kind of wish I'd gone Ring of Dispel. And I think that's like the maximizing damage option. But I went Raven Effigy because I need the buttons, I need the resets for my dash strike, and I need the iframes really critically in the boss fight. So I think it was the right decision. I don't love Raven Effigy. I feel like Raven Effigy is just two epic items taped together at the moment. And since the game is Raven's Watch, and you know, Ravens are kind of our patron saints here, I feel like Raven Effigy deserves to have more of an identity for itself. It's just, right now it's extremely generic. So I'm hopeful that we'll see something more exciting with Raven Effigy. Although I think it does it makes a lot of sense to take it here because I needed the resets, I needed the iframes. Something I think that they should change at the end of chapters is that now everything washes to red. I think that needs to be tweaked a little bit because you could see in that fight that there was just too much going on, and so it's harder to dodge and to control. Taking a fight that late in the chapter obviously isn't going to go anywhere. I wouldn't have had time to win that anyway, but I think it would be healthy for the game if there was a little bit less bloom and busyness in that phase. So this isn't the most dominant chapter 2. I'd say this is still relatively competitive, but my damage output is feeling quite decent. So that's 600 damage on a hit there. I think this build can get up to 2k already, based on where it's at. So we smack some eye stalks. Let's see also if... Okay, yeah. I was going to say, do we see if we end up needing those extra iframes? Maybe we did right there, actually. Oh, we transformed. Okay, I tanked some damage there, and it wasn't that big of a deal. Oh, I tanked that as well. But then I heal it back instantly. Dash strike and 1,000 damage right there. Oh, yeah. So these... I started... My big dash strikes right now are 1,000 damage, right? Well, that's pretty good because it's on the dash strike, so I get a ton of resets. But if I were to charge up a full energy power, that would have been probably a larger burst of damage, but it didn't make sense because I could just play for the dash strikes. It's kind of one of those places where that the energy value isn't as high because we're playing kind of a dash strike build. I get a little bit of a nosebleed. I guess I get bodied a little bit here in a second. So I'm kind of figuring out where I fit into the Chapter 3 difficulty scaling. I'm very cautious about the witch here. I dodge your stuff because I've had some bad experiences with witches in the past. I had a Piper run where I got to Chapter 3 and a witch touched me and I just instantly died. And after that, it made me, the benefit of experience, I'm just very paranoid whenever I'm facing off against witches. But I thought that I took more damage in this fight. Maybe it's the next one. Yeah, it's the next one. But yeah, whenever you come into a new chapter, everything gets its scaling updated. And so we're kind of in this stage right now where we're trying to decide, okay, where do we fit in? How big of a dog am I in this chapter? There's some updates to the animations in Chapter 3. I think that the enemies, I think they actually mostly were buffs. Took some damage there. Got a paltry amount of shards. It doesn't really matter. Okay, here I think. So these are not that big of an enemy, but man, did they do a lot of damage. I didn't have a dash right away, so I didn't get the healing back. So I'm still pretty mortal here at the start of Chapter 3. And I think that based on what I've seen from the community, that's been people's experience, that Chapter 3 is a little more difficult than it was previously. And I think that's really interesting because one of the challenges in Raven's Watch is that it's very hard at the front, but items are very strong and talents are very strong and crit is very strong. So a lot of the time you wildly outscale the difficulty of the game. They when in the dev stream they talked about some of the inspirations for Raven's Watch. They mentioned a MOBA I hadn't heard of. They talked about Risk of Rain 2. They talked about Hades. And I think it's interesting because in a lot of ways Raven's Watch is an amalgamation of Risk of Rain 2 and Hades particularly, and there's definitely MOBA cooked in there as well. What I think is really interesting is that items feel to me a lot like items in Raven's Watch, in Risk of Rain 2. This is kind of a fun dodge right there. Get your ankles broken, wolves. Right here, I feel extremely strong, right? I just face up against that whole pack and it goes great. But anyway, items kind of feel like Risk of Rain 2 items. So think of the difference between getting a 57 leaf clover, if that makes sense to you, if you're a Risk of Rain 2 enjoyer, getting a 57 leaf clover and getting a Wake of Vultures. Those are both high rarity items. They're both red items in Risk of Rain 2, which is analogous to our legendary items, legendary objects. But they're very, very different in terms of how good they are. And so what a run looks like in Risk of Rain 2 is you're just going to get pummeled for the first 20 minutes. And at the end of the 20 minutes, if you survive in Risk of Rain 2, a lot of the time you're ahead of the power curve. And then you basically just body everything the rest of the run. That's a distinction there between Risk of Rain 2 and Hades. In Hades, your average run, you will generally get to Chapter 3 or 4 or to Hades even. If you've had that time and you've gotten that experience with the game. You're going to, on average, do better. But the thing is, you'll often lose the game in the final boss fight. So I think that that's an important thing to kind of contrast, is that the where you lose a game is very different between those two games, and the balance is very different. Hades, your power curve feels more linear. Like you're getting stronger, but usually the boosts aren't that extreme. Whereas Risk of Rain 2, you can have a moment, right? You can have a moment where you're struggling and you get a particular item and all of a sudden it's a cakewalk, right? You can just have that Boolean flip and all of a sudden the game is easy. Raven's Watch has more so, I'd say, the power scaling characteristics I'd associate with Risk of Rain 2 than with Hades. And that means it's really hard to balance the back half. The front part of the game feels very controlled. I mean, yeah, like you're fighting tough stuff and it wrecks you. And it's easy for them to balance that part of the game because there aren't as many variables. But when you introduce more variables in the back half, in legendary objects and critical damage and stuff like that, all of a sudden the player is on an exponential power curve, and it's difficult to make a balanced matching curve for the game to follow. And I think that's one of the challenges that the devs haven't really figured out how they want to handle. Like, is the identity of the game that you either die or you end up in a power fantasy situation? Or is it more like Hades, where that you're winning and and then all of a sudden, an incremental update to the environment around you, you're kind of on the back foot, right? Like, is it a more gradient change, or is it a harsher, more punishing one? And there doesn't have to be a definitive answer here, right? It doesn't have to be one or the other, but probably can't be both. And I don't think that we figured out as a community what we want. And I think the devs with this change, they were trying to make it. They're trying to flatten some of like the extreme cases, the extreme builds, and they did flatten some of them. Has anyone checked on Aladdin lately, by the way? I'm not sure if he's okay, but as you can see here, we're getting towards the end of chapter 3. Well, I guess we're about halfway through chapter 3, and we're very much in control. I'm not really dodging very much. I'm not mitigating damage as much as I'm using Swan Cloak, and I'm hitting for almost 3k on some of these hits, which isn't the most extreme case I've ever seen, but it's still very respectable. And we're scaling with it, right? We have 10 more minutes to scale before we face the chapter bosses. So it feels very much like by the time we get there, we aren't going to have to really play the boss. We can just kind of play whatever our style feels like it ought to be, and it will work. So philosophically, is this what we want with Raven's Watch? That the end part of the game is substantially easier? Or how can we even make that work? How can we like add some kind of an exponential scaling without making the average case, maybe like when you're playing a new character, not feel bad? Because that's one of the problems right now. I would say there are all these modifiers to make the game harder. And I would like, and it sounds like what their idea is for more of the difficulty scaling not to be a nightmare, but to be in the challenge modifiers. So the thing is, the overall Raven's Watch is very hard. In like compare Raven's Watch Nightmare to Monsoon, or even Hades, like after your unlocks and like prior to or just as you start adding heat modifiers. Raven's Watch is a harder game than those are. I don't think we need to scale Nightmare difficulty on the average case. I think that side of the game really belongs in the challenge modifiers. It took me 6 tries to get to this run. And I'm coming back. I haven't been playing as much lately, but I think that for your average Ravens Watch player, that's pretty typical. And this is my best character and my best starting talent, right? This is a Scarlet Shadow Strikes run. The Shadow Strikes has been nerfed, but this is kind of the best case for me. And it took me quite a few tries to get a Nightmare run with it. So I don't know. By the way, look at me just staring in defeat because I have so much money, but everything costs a ton. Anyway, the challenge is like, how do we make the average case still let you branch out and do new things? Because I thought when challenge modifiers were introduced that I would be playing around a lot. I think that one of the interesting things we haven't really tapped into as a community is doing like single chapters with modifiers just to experience them starting from level 1. I think it'd be really interesting to do that and get more familiarity with chapter 2 and 3, more repetitions, understand how a start feels, and get a better idea of how strong those chapters are in those cases. But I haven't really done that because I feel like I haven't really experienced Nightmare on all the characters. There's a couple things that slowed me down. Obviously, since I'm making videos, it means that I can't grind as efficiently as I would just as a player. But I think that there's currently Nightmare is prohibitively difficult in the casual case to keep you from diversifying your heroes and experiencing a lot of different hero picks. At least it is for me, and I'd have to see. I'd be curious how that is generally in the community. I think that Nightmare should not be any more difficult, and that we should move the burden of challenge over to challenge modifiers more so. I know there's some complaints in the community about like how much, for individuals who've prestiged on all their characters, like what are they playing for at this point? Like what's the motivator? And I think that the team at Passtech is looking for ways to add interesting things there. But I think that the challenge modifiers, honestly, we haven't really tapped into that as a community. There's so much there to experience that we haven't really gotten into. And I mean, at some point, it is a game, like there's a limit to how much utility we're going to get out of it, and how much we can expect to continue to get replayability. I think that there's still a lot to tap and to get into to extend the life of the game, and I hope that we will. But I think realistically, a lot of times passionate fan bases kind of kill games because, they demand increasingly difficult and niche things until it becomes really inaccessible for new players to get into. And in the meanwhile, they're really dissatisfied because, they have 2,000 hours in a game and it's boring and they blame the game. And it's kind of like, well, you got 2,000 hours of value out of something that cost you $20. Like there's going to be diminishing returns at some point, and maybe you're just there. I don't know. Philosophically, let's leave that one. Let's table that one for now. I'll get off my soapbox for that. Let's see. I think, by the way, I picked up, let's see, I didn't get Ring of Dispel yet. I have Holy Grail. So I have Holy Grail and I have Swan Cloak. Those are two of the best defensive legendaries in the game. I think maybe I think that it really suits Scarlet's playstyle as well, because she has all the lifesteal, because she kind of plays this more aggressive in-your-face melee style. That's one of the things that's interesting. That right now the game scores based off of a couple of things. One of them being how little damage you take. I guess it like scoring, getting high scores on runs in general in Raven's Watch doesn't interest me a ton. I feel like the purest way to play a roguelike is to win. And if you win the game, that's really the big indication of how things were. And the number at the end just isn't quite as appealing to me or interesting to me. And I also think that there's some characters like Scarlet, you know, she's very much feast or famine, in your face. She doesn't have the damage mitigation of Beowulf or Monkey King, right? Like both of those have a lot of ways to block damage, and she doesn't really have that. So the scoring based off of damage taken when a lot of the kit is lifesteal, it's a little, I don't know. Again, I don't think scoring is necessarily the most interesting way. I also kind of don't think that speed running, I haven't caught the speed running bug in any of the roguelikes I play yet. It's maybe that's something that will come with more time, but definitely at this point, I'd say that to me it's more interesting to take runs to really strong conclusions to see how punishing a game can be early to me, to see how far I'm able to get to the point where that my build takes over, right? I think it's interesting to be in a competitive situation with the game and then all of a sudden you kind of work your way out of it because your knowledge and the way you build has mitigated those problems. Took a lot of damage here. I think that they said, although Chapter 3 is harder on average, I think that they said that they nerfed some of the damage. So that's... I think... I mentioned before, I think I mentioned this, that I had a Piper run where the witch touched me and I just instantly died. That doesn't seem like there's quite as much of that since the update. Now, I think I put this money into Shadow Strikes and Energy. I think I just doubled down on the crit from both of those. I may have also... Did I go Nibelungen Ring? Okay, I did. Giving you more ult charges. I don't know. Ults are interesting in the game. It's funny because there's a lot of characters where you don't really benefit that much by having more of them. Okay, yeah, I want to talk about this mini boss. So they made the witch bigger. I think that I don't know if they added armor or not to all of the spawns for this. Maybe they did. So the way this mini boss works, you probably know this, is that the enemies all have 75% damage block, but besides that, they're just kind of regular spawns. So you have the witches, they're throwing poison apples, and the big witch on the broom. There's probably a different term for the little witches, but and everything that every time you kill something, it goes into this intangible immortal state until you finish getting them all. I don't love this mini boss, to be honest. I think it's just the witch's moveset, right? I feel like the other mini bosses feel more interesting to me, and this is kind of just the generic witch on a broom, and she has a couple sycophants that follow her around and throw apples at you. I don't know if maybe they're planning something else here, but like, think about we have a couple different gargoyles, we have a couple different wolves, we have a couple different suits of armor. Obviously we have a couple different like witch archetypes, but I feel like there's room there for a mini boss that is a little more in the theme of the other mini bosses we see from chapter 1 and 2. Like the giant crab is cool, the giant ghoul is cool. I detest the giant painted white lady on principle, but it's all good. Like imagine if it was a big suit of armor with an interesting moveset. I feel like that would be a pretty hype mini boss. As it stands, it doesn't feel as hype to me. I don't know that's the thing that needs the most attention though in the game at the moment, but it's just something that I think would be fun to add some layers to. I'm just kind of fighting here to fight. I don't really, because the well prices being as they are, like this item is it's not super worthwhile. A lot of rerolls. Oh, and a Horn of Plenty. This is interesting. So Horn of Plenty and Green Armor both have this interesting thing that if you pick them, the later you pick them up in the run, often like they'll just have a huge spike in their value. I got a ton of vitality out of that Horn of Plenty, and that's really, that ends up being really nice for me. But like if I had gotten that in chapter 1, it would have been almost no value at all. It's interesting. There's all this space with vitality builds at the moment in Ogre's Blood that I haven't really explored. I don't play much Monkey, and I think that there's a lot of vitality oriented stuff there. But yeah, it feels like there are a couple of these green items that have almost a legendary impact if you pick them up in the right phase of the game. Don't know that that's a bad thing, but it is objectively, like, it's really crazy how big of an impact you can get from those. It's about time for the boss fight now. I go ahead and try to TP up here, but that was just did it out of a reflex. So we're going into the boss fight, and something about how the game works right now is that when you go into the boss fight, if you just use a bunch of cooldowns, they don't come back. So you can start the fight without cooldowns. That didn't really matter in this case, but I think it'd be better if that wasn't the case. I also ate a lot of damage there, and in general, I'm going to take a lot of damage in this fight, and that's really because I don't have a lot of pressure on me to actually play around the bosses at all, because I've outscaled the game, right? I take a lot of damage here, but it doesn't matter too much. I get one of the bosses, and I could have gotten both of them here probably, but I decided to go a little bit slower just because I wanted to use an ultimate, just see the pretty lights. And I took all that damage, and then I landed a massive crit bite, I should say, not a devour technically. Got it all back, took a bunch of damage there, got it all back again. So much lifesteal. Lifesteal is really hard to balance, and I kind of like that. It's again like Risk of Rain 2 versus kind of a Hades style. Not a lot of healing in Hades, but that's pretty much it. So I'd say Scarlet still really works well. Crit really works well because you're not taking as many rerolls. You're going to be taking more crit, so it's kind of the crit builds I'm turning out are probably even better at crit specifically. Do we want the game to be more of a crazy Risk of Rain 2 style of build, or do we want it to be more Hades, where things are more pulled in and the highs aren't as high, but the lows maybe are a little bit more consistent? Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see what we want, but I think that Scarlet's still in a pretty good place, and I think that's pretty much it. Obviously, this is no longer the patch that's out. The shop is back in the newest update, and difficulty, I think, should be going into challenge modifiers rather than being more of a product of the Nightmare difficulty. That's it for this one. See you later.